Thank you everybody for coming to our third Idaho 5 for 5 Soil Health Roundtable of the 2022-2023 season. This will be our last one of the season, and we'll start up again in the fall. My name is Courtney Cosden. I'm a soil health instructor for U of I Extension and NRCS. And Sean Neild is here with me. He's our state soil scientist for NRCS, and he's kind of, we're partner in crimes on these 5 for 5. I wanted to do a quick plug for our field days. We're working on coming up with some field days for the season, and we would love to, or we invite you to, if you have anything you want to share with everyone or anything you want to see, please get a hold of us and we can try to make that happen, whether that's for an impromptu field day or something that's where you want to share at an impromptu field day, or something you want to see at a bigger field day. Please let us know. So the way this works, we have 4 presenters today, and we're going to do it to where after each presenter presents their information in 5 minutes with 5 slides or less, hence the 5 for 5. We'll ask questions immediately after their presentation and then go on. And yeah, so we have a lot of, or 4 really great presentations today, presenters and their presentations. We have Ben Bowell, who is going to, hold on one second, I'll get my notes here. Ben Bowell with Oregon Tilth, who's going to present about Oregon's new transition to organic program. We have Brynne Lazarus with the U.S. Geological Survey, who's going to talk to us about herbicide effects on soil. Albert Adjesiwor, who's with U of I Extension, who's going to talk to us about chemical termination of cover crops. And we have Davey Olsen with Amalgamated Sugar, who's going to discuss nurse crops in beets. So yeah, I think everybody is muted, so I don't even need to ask you all to mute. And I think unless anybody has any questions, we are good to go. All right, so yeah, with that being said, Ben is going to be our first presenter.
Great, thanks. I'll share here real quick. See that okay?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, great, thanks. Well, hi everybody, I'm Ben, thanks for having me. I met Sean at an organic soil health workshop that was going on a couple of months ago. So he invited me to come talk to everybody briefly about what I was sharing there. I work with Oregon Tilth. We're largely an organic certifier, but we also do organic education and advocacy. I manage our education and advocacy. So I'm here to talk a little bit about a new USDA initiative around supporting transition into organic. The specific piece of it that I want to talk about is called the Transition to Organic Partnership Program. It's a new program just getting started. It's going to be around for 5 years. And the reason I'm here is Oregon Tilth was selected from USDA to lead the initiative for the Northwest region, which includes Idaho. So we have 6 states: Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. And we're just getting started on that work and excited to share a little bit more. I know this is a soil health meeting, but I know that I also think there's a lot of overlap with organic here and some relevance to share. So most all organic producers, I think, do care about soil health. The organic regulations actually require organic producers to think about soil health. They have to maintain or improve the physical, chemical, biological condition of the soil and prevent soil erosion. They have to manage their plant and animal materials to improve soil health, soil organic matter. And so I think a lot of producers who are interested in soil health may want to consider organic certification or explore organic certification as like a market premium for doing some of those soil health practices. So anyway, the programs that I'm going to talk about are really designed to help producers think about the transition or explore the transition into organic certification. And so it's all this work is going to be available to any producer across the region who could work with any organic certifier. And so as I mentioned, it's just getting kicked off. It'll be going for 5 years. But some of the programmatic pieces that we're going to be rolling out, I think, are really exciting. One of them is that we're going to have a farmer-to-farmer mentorship program across the entire region. And so experienced organic farmers will be paid. It's like $3,000 a year per producer that they work with, and they'll be paid to kind of share their successful systems with other producers who are transitioning into organic. And they're really a focus around kind of like their production practices. So how they address weed management, nutrient management, pests, all that kind of stuff. And so we're really excited to be able to include that and think it'll be, we've heard a lot from transitioning producers that that is how they want to learn from other producers. And so we're excited about that piece. We'll also have lots of technical assistance and training and partnering with lots of organizations like Extension and others to help deploy that and provide assistance around production practices, but also the certification process, how to fill out all the paperwork, how to do all the record keeping and things like that. Also be working on what we're calling community building. And so that's trying to create a place where producers can go to access the different programs, the resources, the people, all the things they need to know about to become successful organic producers. And then finally, kind of working on workforce development and training, another piece in there to support, increase the expertise of others who work with producers to have increase their organic knowledge so that they can better support organic and transitioning producers. So that mentorship program in particular that we're really excited about, it will be beginning in May. We are at a point of trying to start recruiting some of the mentors to build up that kind of pool of mentors so that then when we go out and talk with people who are interested in the transition to organic, there's already somebody to potentially match them with. We're thinking of mentors as people who have at least 3 years of organic experience. Again, I mentioned they get paid around $3,000. They get paid $3,000 a year per mentee that they have. So obviously a lot more to come on all of this programming. It's the new Transition Organic Partnership Program. We have a new acronym in my vocabulary, which is TOPP, what we're referring to it. So there's contact information on there and the link. And so I'd be happy to take questions around that. I think I'm at 5 minutes.
Wow, 5 minutes, Ben. That's something. I don't think that happens too often.
This is Barry. If I can ask a question.
Please.
Oh, you can hear me. Good, even better. Do you have any livestock in this organic program or anticipate that?
Yeah.
And, yeah, go ahead, shoot.
Yes, sure. Absolutely. Yes. Livestock. Absolutely. So, it's one of the things about organic that's fun and overwhelming to us is that it could be any cropping system, any livestock system that's across the West could be potentially organic. And so we'll be looking to recruit for the mentorship in particular, certified livestock producers and crop producers. And so it's open to any type of systems.
Do you, once you jump through all these hoops, and I assume the documentation would be fairly extensive, what's the economic benefit to trying to get into the organic market over and above, philosophical issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it really varies based upon the type of crops you grow, how you access the market. Are you selling locally? Are you selling through, commodities? And it really depends on the market. There's generally speaking, across all types of production systems, there's like an average of around a 30% premium on organic, but that's not specific to one thing and it depends on your geography and some of the different barriers that you may face. So like with livestock, you have to, if it's produced for meat, you have to have certified organic slaughter facility, for example, to be able to sell it as certified organic meat, and so that can be a barrier in some places. And yes, there is documentation required. That's part of the certification process. The records, looking at the certified organic feed that's required for livestock, for example. We have and will be producing a lot more resources and technical assistance to help people with the record keeping systems and the paperwork. We generally find that it's a barrier initially before moving into transition, but once people get their record keeping systems set up, that they don't find it as big of a burden as initially. So.
Are you aware of any organic slaughter facilities in Idaho that kill sheep?
That's a great question. I honestly don't know, but I can look it up. There's a database that lists out all certified operations.
If you would get that to Courtney, please.
Sure. Yeah, the compensation to the mentors. I see that question in the chat. So mentors will be paid $3,000 a year for that mentorship year. And we have certain criteria that the USDA is asking us to meet to make sure that the mentors do those things, do enough. So there's a certain number of hours that they need to interact with the mentee. It can be done virtually, and so they could be virtual visits, phone, whatever mode of communication works. There's a few hours of initial training. We have to make sure that those certified producers are careful on what they're consulting on, for example, around the organic regulations and a few things like that. And then if they work with multiple mentees, they get paid additional. I think if we max out at like 5, then they start to get a little bit less per mentee, but we've thought about and heard some producers that are kind of on their way out or into retirement that may be interested in sharing some of their expertise, and could imagine like kind of a group setting of mentors. But so I don't know if that answers that question. Looks like Brian has their hand up.
This is a really great program. I'm pretty excited to learn more about it. I do have a producer here in Mount Hear County that I think this would fit really nice for. They're learning or just getting into the market. Organic farmers have a lot of questions that probably could be answered through a mentor program like this. So I guess my question is, if they are already in the USDA system where they're in the transitioning program, can they also participate in this program? And if so, maybe you can get some information to me on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear that you have somebody in mind. And yes, the USDA has told us we're allowed to do the mentorship within the first year of being certified. So it's like when they're in the transition timing, but then also at the very beginning of being certified organic. And then in addition to the mentorship program, there'll be other opportunities for some like one-on-one consulting, technical assistance type of things that can go for not just during transition, but into certification as well. And we see that a lot, that within the first few years, people still need and would benefit from a lot of support and resources. So yes and yes. And I will drop in the link for more information and where you could direct that producer to sign up, and we can follow up with them and figure out how best to support them.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for Ben? All right. Well, thank you so much, Ben. And yeah, if you want to forward any information to me, I can get it out to Barry or Ryan or whoever.
Awesome. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah. And our next presenter is Brynne Lazarus with the USGS to talk us about herbicides and soil and their effect on soil. I'm super excited to hear about.
Okay. Thanks, Courtney. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes. Just,
okay.
Oh yeah. And we can see your screen now. Perfect.
Great. Okay. And give me 1 second so that good. Okay. Thanks. So as Courtney introduced me, Brynne Lazarus, I'm a botanist with the USGS at the Snake River Field Station here in Boise, Idaho. And working with Matt Germino also of USGS, Mariana DeGraaf, Toby Maxwell, and Allison Simler-Williamson, who are all Boise State faculty. So herbicides are just a really critical and often applied tool for breaking the cheatgrass fire cycle and sagebrush steppe ecosystems, but our information base on their non-target effects is incomplete. And in particular, we really need to know more about their effects on soils to be sure that we aren't causing harm to below ground ecosystems, since this could have feedback effects on our ability to restore ecosystems. So to do this, we're leveraging many herbicide applications that we've made in cooperation with various partners all over Southwest Idaho. And these are all replicated experiments, plots, controls, pretty intense vegetation monitoring in addition to soil sampling. We've got treatments applied in different years as far back as 2016 to as recently as 2021, and all having varied weather conditions. We have studies that include imazapic, so plateau, rimsulfuron, matrix, indaziflam, rejuvra. These are all pre-emergent herbicides that particularly go after those exotic annual grasses like cheatgrass, Medusa head, jointed goatgrass. And then we also have begun working a little bit with aminopyrrolid milestone to go after skeleton weed. But today I'll focus primarily on this study that was initiated in 2016. It's got 3 sites that varied in climate, soils, and plant communities along a gradient in elevation and precipitation. From Avamore up in the Boise foothills in the Idaho batholith ecoregion, that's our highest, wettest site, to Orchard out in the Birds of Prey NCA on the Snake River Plain, to Wildcat out in the base of the Owyhee Mountains in the Northern Basin and Range. That's our lowest, driest site. And in this study, we applied the herbicides imazapic and rimsulfuron. And so we're focused on the soil components that relate most directly to vegetation. So specifically soil biotic communities, so bacteria, fungi, invertebrates, the processes they facilitate, nitrogen mineralization, carbon CO2 respiration, and then the plant growth resources that these processes regulate, so nitrogen and carbon. But of course, it's not this simple. Soil resources feedback on the plant community and on soil biotic communities, and all of this feeds back on the plant community. So a better way to represent it might be more like this. And then the question is, how might herbicides affect all of this? So herbicides could have direct effects on soil communities. For example, imazapic inhibits a particular enzyme that plants have and animals don't, but bacteria and fungi do have this enzyme in a slightly different form. And some species are more likely to be susceptible than others to the herbicide. So herbicide might kill some soil organisms, but not others, and in so doing, provide a carbon substrate for those others that it didn't kill, thus shifting the balance of species in the community. And herbicides could also have indirect effects on soil processes and resources through the plant community. So changes in the plant community by herbicides could change the type and amount of litter or root exudates that are available to the soil biotic community. And this could also result in changes to the soil biotic community composition and thus lead to changes in soil processes and resources. So there's a lot that could potentially be going on here. So I'll show you a little bit of data now, and I'll start with soil resources, and in particular available mineral nitrogen, so ammonium and nitrate. And once again, recall that Avamore is that highest and wettest, most productive site. I better use my cursor over here. Avamore, highest, wettest, most productive site. Wildcat, the lowest, driest site. We're looking at 2 time points, the first fall and the second spring after we applied. And then the treatments are here on the x-axis. So control in gray, imazapic in blue, rimsulfuron in purple. And let's see, to put these data in context, you also need to know that imazapic and rimsulfuron both reduced exotic annual grasses at all the sites during this time period, although rimsulfuron, which wears off more quickly than imazapic, was already beginning to wear off at the Wildcat site in spring of 2018. And so we see that we applied these herbicides, they've decreased exotic annual grass cover, though not as much here, and that we've measured increased mineral nitrogen. And this is particularly strong in our sites with lower productivity, drier sites, so orchard and wildcat. Okay, and now I'll talk a little about soil processes. So nitrogen mineralization, the process of converting organic nitrogen into plant available mineral nitrogen, and CO2 respiration, the process of converting organic carbon into carbon dioxide. And these data are from the wildcat site in spring of 2018. And again, we've got control in gray, imazapic in blue, room sulfuron in purple, nitrogen mineralization up above, and CO2 respiration down below. And these show that both herbicides increased potential net nitrogen mineralization, but that neither one significantly affected CO2 respiration. Okay, and we also have some information about the effects of herbicides on soil communities, specifically invertebrates. And I'm talking about tiny little organisms that come crawling out of the bottom of these columns of soil when you shine a light in the top, and that you need to look at under a stereoscope to identify. So springtails and mites and ticks and roundworms. And again, Avamore is the highest elevation wet site, orchard, medium, wildcat, lowest, driest. And we have total invertebrates on the y-axis and treatment, control, imazapic, and room sulfuron, again, on the x-axis. And here the results are mixed and they vary by site, with invertebrates increasing with both herbicides at Avamore, decreasing with room sulfuron at orchard, and increasing with room sulfuron at wildcat. And so these patterns really don't match the effects of the herbicides on annual grasses the way the mineral nitrogen data I showed you earlier did. They're better aligned, at least qualitatively, with some of the patterns we observed in non-target plant functional groups, like short-lived, shallow-rooted perennial grasses. So here's a summary of what we know so far in a nutshell about herbicide effects on soil resources: increased mineral nitrogen, soil processes, increased nitrogen mineralization, and soil communities, mixed effects on invertebrates that are site dependent. And we're also, the jury's still out on bacteria and fungi, but we're working on these as well. So I'll have more information about that soon, but not yet. So given these effects of herbicides on soils, particularly the increased mineral nitrogen, I'll close with what I think the million-dollar question should be for any herbicide application made with the goal of controlling exotic annual grasses in sagebrush steppe ecosystems, and that is, who gets that available mineral nitrogen? So unfortunately, many areas that are sprayed with herbicides suffer from reinvasion, particularly where the longevity of herbicide effects is brief, and the exotic annual grass seed bank is still present when the effects wear off. Another unfortunately common phenomenon after herbicide treatment is secondary invasion by forbs, such as skeleton weed or Russian thistle. And that excess nitrogen that I showed you that's released when exotic annual grasses are removed by herbicides is likely part of the explanation for that phenomenon. So thus, it seems clear that restoration strategies that increase the likelihood that desired plants, such as native perennials, can capture mineralized nutrients after herbicide application will likely be more successful. So I'll end with gratitude to the agencies and individuals who made this work possible, and ask if there are any questions. And I will go ahead.
This Barry, I'd like to ask a question or two, please. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Was your focus when you began, was this in terms of fire control or improved grazing habitat and wildlife habitat? What was the initial idea that brought this project?
Well, this particular project was actually initiated by the Sage Grouse Actions team. So they were, yes, particularly interested in sage grouse, in getting rid of cheatgrass to improve sage grouse habitat.
Nesting sites, things, yeah.
Yep, so that's how it began, but I would say that there's, I think, potential application to all of what you mentioned.
So you're eliminating this annual. You don't talk about crested wheat or anything else out there that would be better grazing than some of these things.
Right. We're particularly targeting the exotic annual grasses, yes. And that does have often the effect of releasing crested wheatgrass if it's there. So if you're thinking about applying herbicides like this on pastures, for example, to improve them for grazing, then you might release crested wheatgrass.
Why weren't earthworms considered in your invertebrates?
Well, we have one way of getting, well, I don't know how common earthworms would have been in these sites. They're pretty dry, pretty yucky sites. Although that higher elevation one, perhaps. I haven't personally in my time out there digging around seen earthworms, but they could be there. But I guess we would have found them if they were in the soil samples that we took, but we did not find them in the soil samples that we took.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, most of what crawled out was pretty tiny.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Very interesting, Brynne. I did not expect those results.
Yeah.
I have a question, and then there's a question in the chat also. I was wondering why at the Avamore site, if you have any ideas why we saw the invertebrates increase with the applications.
I think, well, we saw that at two sites, right? Avamore and Wildcat. And what we think happened is and we particularly saw it with the rimsulfuron. And what the rimsulfuron did especially well was, in that first year after treatment, it really knocked back the annual grasses better than anything else did. But it also was very damaging to shallow rooted perennial bunch grasses. So Poa bulbosa and Poa segunda. So one of those is a native, really important native Poa segunda, and the other Poa bulbosa is, well, I don't know what everyone's perspective on it is, but it's not a native. And so and that happened at both Avamore and Wildcat. And so just qualitatively speaking, in the sites where the rimsulfuron killed a lot of these like shallow rooted perennial grasses, we saw them increase. So it may be that we provided sort of an extra food source for them in terms of maybe dead root matter or dead above ground plant matter. I think there would have been probably more dead root matter. And Amazipic, not so much. And then at that orchard site, there really wasn't much in the way of Poa segunda, and there wasn't any Poa bulbosa. And what happened instead when we added for both rimsulfuron and Amazipic is that we released biotic soil crusts, so the lichen and the moss. So that's kind of qualitatively the pattern that best fits the vegetation, how sort of the best relationship between the vegetation and the invertebrates that we can show or that we can talk about. And we certainly got a bigger increase at Wildcat, and at Avamore, and we think that might be just that there's more moisture. So, these invertebrates, they need food and they need moisture because a lot of them breathe through their skin. And so Avamore is the place where they got both food and moisture, and maybe Wildcat, they got food, but perhaps not enough moisture to really increase the way they did it at Avamore.
Thanks,
That's my, yeah.
And I'll read this question. Yeah, no, it was great. Thank you. I'll read this question in the chat and then we can let Ryan ask his question. Shiloh's asking, if you're getting increased mineral nitrogen, wouldn't it indicate that you're killing biology and their death is releasing that mineral N?
So not necessarily, because these are pre-emergent herbicides. Oh, I see. Well, okay. So pre-emergent herbicides would be killing, or they wouldn't be so much killing the plants as they would be preventing them from ever germinating. So I guess the hypothesis we've been working with, and let's address the other one next, is that the herbicides are preventing the cheatgrass from germinating. So it's leaving behind resources that the plant community isn't using. Moisture, so water, in addition to mineral nitrogen. So I think that's the hypothesis that we're working with, is that we have measured, I didn't show, but we have also measured higher moisture in the plots that we didn't, in the plots that we sprayed with herbicide. So we sprayed them with herbicide, the cheatgrass didn't grow, so there's more moisture left behind. So there's more higher mineralization rates and more mineral nitrogen hanging out there in the soil. And I will say that I didn't show results from multiple sites, but we have seen this same thing happen over multiple sites and multiple years. And I guess the other idea, perhaps what this question is asking is, perhaps we killed microbes, and that is what released nitrogen. And I guess that is another explanation to consider, but not, I think most, and I have been looking up sort of literature on, do these things kill microbes directly? And I think that they are thought to kill, they do sort of kill some microbes, but since they don't kill all the microbes, the other microbes tend to eat the ones that you did kill. So that basically folks who study these kinds of things in the laboratory find pretty short-term, or laboratory, or maybe more controlled field studies than we did that are better targeted at microbes, tend to find more sort of short-term effects. And we're looking at sort of a year after treatment or 2 years after treatment. So there's definitely still a microbial community. And we're excited to see, it's quite possible that we've shifted it somehow with the herbicide, but I don't believe that we have built it in a significant way, but I can't, and that's the explanation for the nitrogen increase, but I can't be 100% sure.
This is Ryan again. I have a question and then a couple comments. So we're having a lot of ranchers using this out on the range, this product. Well, not these products, but Rejuvra. I was curious if you're all testing that herbicide in the data set.
Yep, so not in this one, but I did show that we have a bunch of other studies where we are testing Rejuvra, and we are also taking soil measurements. 5 minutes is not a lot of time to tell you everything.
Sure.
And I don't think I even stayed within my 5 minutes, and I apologize for that. But yes, we are seeing that same mineral nitrogen increase with Rejuvra. So, I mean, basically when, I guess this is actually another point I should have made about the last question. When we, because many of us know herbicide treatments are sometimes more successful than others. And so when we have a successful herbicide treatment and we knock back exotic annual grasses, we see a mineral nitrogen release. When we have an unsuccessful or a not so successful herbicide treatment, we don't kill exotic annual grasses, we don't have a mineral nitrogen release. So we feel pretty comfortable with the idea that that it's the removal of the grass, the successful removal of the grasses that's causing that mineral nitrogen release. And yes, Rejuvra, same thing happens with Rejuvra.
Okay, and then my comment is, we're seeing this being used for, reduced fire inputs and increasing range health. and it seems like the products are working. And the one thing that we have noticed is proper scouting to see what you actually have in the field is very helpful. So if you go in and spray and those natives and perennial grasses are not in the seed bank, then you're going to be left with a pretty bare canvas. So that can lead to having to reseed. So it's really important to go out and scout and see what's in your range before you decide to maybe apply this.
Right. And that ties back to the idea of who gets that nitrogen. If you've got lots of native perennials in there already, they may be what gets that nitrogen, and you'll probably like the results. But if, as you say, there's nothing native in the area that you spray, and you, especially if you then don't go back and seed or plant, whatever works best for you in your situation, you'll probably end up with either a return of those exotic annual grasses or something worse, like skeleton weed or Russian thistle, or I guess worse, it just depends what you don't like for your particular application. But you're absolutely right that it's really important to know what you're spraying and have a plan to put some natives in if you don't already have them there, or there's not much use to spraying.
Okay, any other questions for Brynne? All right, I think what's all good. Thank you so much, Brynne, for presenting that information and answering all of those questions.
Okay, thanks for listening, everyone, and for asking good questions.
Next, we have Albert, who is going to talk to us about chemical termination of cover crops. Hi, Albert. Oh, you're still on mute, Albert.
Well, I do that all the time.
That's all right.
Thank you, Courtney, for having me. Let me try and share my screen and let me know if you can see. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, perfect. I can see it now.
All right. So my name is Albert Adjesiwor, and I am a weed scientist. And so most of the time I worry so much about killing things, not so much about soil health. And so I'm going to talk about chemical termination of cover crops. And I'm collaborating on this project with Steve Hines and a couple of other extension faculty. And so thanks to them for collaborating on this. And so we worry about chemical termination because we know that cover crops are becoming very popular for various reasons. They help soil health and also weed suppression in cases, and then erosion control and all the other benefits that we cannot even quantify. And so they're a good thing, but what we've been seeing is that a lot of people plant cover crops and they don't have a good termination plan. In other words, they think that Roundup or glyphosate will kill everything. So we had when I started my job in 2020, and there was a trial, cover crop trial in 2019, and that field was sprayed multiple times. And I planted sugar beet in 2021, and I can still see Italian ryegrass coming up. And possibly this could be resistant to Roundup or glyphosate. And that's one of the major concerns when people plant those cover crop mixes. We have ryegrass species that are resistant to Roundup. And so we just wanted to test different chemical termination treatment to see how best do we terminate the cover crop that we have or people commonly plant in Idaho. So we had about 6 or 8 different cover crop. We have annual ryegrass, Italian, that's also Italian ryegrass. And then we have cereal rice, some chicory, buckwheat. We also had some common veg and hairy veg and some clovers in there. So I'm just gonna flip through on the results, and then you can ask questions later. So this is annual ryegrass, and so I will show a couple of graphs like that, or figures like that. And the cover crop control, kind of the efficacy would be here. So 0 means that nothing died, and 100% means that almost everything died. Because in biology, it's very hard to be certain. You see that even the plots that have the best controls to about 99%, just because there could be one guy hiding under the canopy that we couldn't find. So, and so we had, based on the species, we had 4 different herbicide treatment compared to the untreated. And so I will show a couple of graphs like that, and they'll be set up the same way. So this is annual ryegrass, and in annual ryegrass, we have 2 types, and then the most common is Italian ryegrass. You can see that glyphosate or Roundup, if they are not resistant, still remains the best control or terminating herbicide to get rid of this cover crop before you plant your cash crop. If Roundup doesn't work, there are a couple of options. These 2 are grass herbicide. They only control grasses. They will give you about 80% control. And what this means is that you might have to throw in something into the tank to be able to get rid of this completely. Or you would have to apply this multiple times, like twice, come out with a follow-up treatment. And Liberty also gave us about 80% control. So Roundup still remains the best option, but then if those don't work, you have some options to at least follow up to see what you can do for that. Cereal ryegrass was almost the same. Roundup or glyphosate was the most effective at terminating cereal rye. The others are around 70% control, ish, give or take. And once again, if Roundup doesn't work, or then you would have to come out with one of these 2 or 3 chemistries to control this. I must say that Liberty has about 30 days plant back restrictions to certain crops. And so that's one thing to keep in mind. If you apply something that's not Roundup or a grass herbicide, it will stick in the soil a bit longer than Roundup would do in terms of hurting your cash crop. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Buckwheat set up the same way. As you can see here, the best control we got was about 85%. And that was a combination of 2,4-D and dicamba or clarity. And so what this means is that if you are going into a cash crop, then you have to have a plan as to how to manage this in your cash crop. And so that's some of the things that you just want stakeholders to keep an eye out or kind of like keep in mind when they're planting some of these cover crops. Chicory, almost the same thing. Roundup was sort of our best performing treatment with about 88% control, but nothing would give us an excellent control, which means something 95 or above. And so if you are planting chicory and you are going into a cash crop, then you might have to apply herbicide multiple times to be able to get rid of that. And so there's something to keep in mind. Or what we didn't test in this trial is to do a tillage after that. And I'm sure there's some tillage after this will probably take care of some of the things that were not controlled. But when talking about soil health, I know most of you here are soil health people, so I don't want to tell you to do tillage. Veg, we saw that common veg was kind of easier to control than hairy veg. And we knew before going in that Roundup or glyphosate doesn't work well on veggies. And so if you are planting a veg for, like as a nitrogen source in your cover crop mixes, please keep in mind that Roundup would not completely control that. And as you can see, hairy veg was sort of the same, tougher to control Roundup, and it's not even giving us 50% control. And so if you are planting hairy veg, you might have to go with 2,4-D or a combination of 2,4-D and dicamba. If you do that, know that dicamba will last in the soil a bit more longer. So just keep that in mind in selecting the cash crop that you plant after that to see what works best. The last group of things we looked at were the clovers, so the yellow clover, yellow sweet clover, and then red clover. So red clover, it was tough to kill that thing. Even a 2,4-D and dicamba didn't do a good job. And so these are just things to keep in mind. We're planning to repeat this trial this year to kind of see if we can confirm these results, but I'm pretty sure that the results are going to be nearly the same. If we have time and money after this, I might follow up with a few more other treatment to see, but just a few things to keep in mind when selecting which species to include in your cover crop mix. And yellow sweet clover, the 2,4-D product would do a little bit better compared to red clover, but overall, it's tough to kill these. And so the first slide I showed about the annual ryegrass. They had a yellow sweet clover in that field, and that field has been sprayed 4 times, still 3 times, and it's still yellow sweet clover coming up. And so there's a few things to keep in mind when you are selecting these cover crop mixes, and kind of have a termination plan before you see those. And I want to say thanks to my crew and University of Idaho Extension for funding this. And with that, thank you for your time, and I will stop sharing so that you can ask all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Super important information for sure. Always need to have a plan when you're terminating or plan when you're planting cover crops.
Courtney, Barry, can I ask a question, please?
Go for it, Barry.
I see, Albert, that Steve Hines was one of the initiators of this, and I'm just looking at the different things that they planted and actually wondering why. Italian ryegrass is a biennial, not an annual. And what are they doing with yellow blossom sweet clover? Same story. It'll last for quite a long time, several seasons, and red clover again. And chicory, some of these are $5, $6, $7 a pound ingredients. What was their goal, I wonder, to begin with? Just a shotgun approach to cover crops, or really the focus was just termination?
That's a good question. And the focus was mostly on termination. So Steve Hines has been doing this for a while, and his goal is to come out with a kind of periodic table of cover crops to see which cover crops do better and produce much biomass in our region. And so these were chosen based on what he has found over the years, that these seem to do better in our region. And so growers are more likely to plant these species. And so that's why we chose those. But for this specific trial, the main objective is to see what chemicals work better for terminating this.
Sure. Good. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple questions in the chat. One for, Barry Cooper is addressing your question. Many of those species are included in small amounts in corn polycultures. That's from Cooper.
Okay.
Thank you.
What?
And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So the second question, what were some species that were easier to terminate? So the 2 grasses were easier to terminate because Roundup worked so well on those 2. But aside those 2 grasses, I think the second one that was easier to terminate was the common veg. And that was mostly the 2,4-D and dicamba that worked well. And so this, if you're planting sugar beet, for example, they might have to spray the dicamba, the 2,4-D way earlier to be able to kind of prevent an injury to your beet. And so those are some things to keep in mind. These chemicals work well. If you are going into grains, you have no problem because you can, 2,4-D will not do anything to your small grains, but depending on the crop you are going into would also determine what herbicide you choose to use to terminate those cover crops. But in terms of overall, I think common veg was easier among the broadleaves to terminate. And the grasses, both of them, Roundup work well. If Roundup doesn't work, then you are looking at least 2-time application, some of the chemicals that we looked at, or a higher rate.
Thanks, Albert. Any other questions for Albert? All right. Well, thank you so much, Albert, for the information. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me. And you can always reach out if you have any follow-up questions. I'm going to drop off and join another meeting. Thanks.
Okay. Have a great day.
Thanks, Albert.
All right, and our last presentation is Davey Olsen, and he's going to talk to us about, nurse crop in sugar beet. So Davey, if you want to share your screen when you're ready.
Excellent, guys, thank you. So every year we have to replant thousands of acres of sugar beets, primarily because they either get froze out or they get blown out of the ground. It's just really windy here, as you guys know, and the soil moves around a lot. The sugar beets get blown out and it costs our growers a lot of money and time and energy and effort. And so one of the things we try to promote is establishing a nurse crop, something that can shield those young, tender sugar beets from the wind and hold the soil in place until they get going, and then kind of spray them out. The idea is to plant a nurse crop, help with soil erosion and protection from the wind. So there's many different ways you can do this. A lot of guys do plant a wheat in the fall, or they can plant something ahead of sugar beets in the springtime and then just spray it out. And so here's an example of Derek Mayer's farm in Rupert. And on the left-hand photo there, you can see he's planted up some wheat in the fall and he's left some gaps for planting sugar beet in the spring. And on the right-hand side there, he's planted his row of sugar beets down the middle and then just sprayed it out. And you can see that would be a pretty effective kind of barrier for the wind and just kind of keep the soil in place and keep those little sugar beets protected. Ryan and Logan Robertson in Dietrich, they broadcast wheat right across the field. Then they spray out some strips and they plant sugar beets into it. And then when the beets come up, they go back and they spray the whole field out at that point. And then other guys will plant wheat a couple of weeks ahead of sugar beets and then spray it out, plant the beets into it and spray it out. But at some point, no matter which method you use, there will come a point where the wheat will compete with the sugar beets, and it'll compete for sunlight, for water, for nutrients. And so you have to be really timely in spraying it out. Otherwise, you're going to impact your yield of your cash crop. And the question is, well, what is the optimal time for spraying that out? So we had a look at that in a 2022 study at our cover cropping farm just south of Declo. We had 6 treatments and 8 reps in a 6-row plot kind of design. And we chose to do a spring plant of wheat and then plant sugar beets a couple of weeks later. And here's us planting our wheat. Drilled at about 38 pounds on a standard kind of wheat spacing. And that was last week of March, and look how dusty and dry and everything is last year. It's amazing. And here we are, still haven't planted. Sugar beets, a couple of weeks later, planted directly into that wheat, and the wheat was only about 3 inches tall at the time. They were manually thinned and then harvested towards the end of September. And really the treatments were just spraying out the wheat at different times. So we sprayed it out when it was 4 inches tall, 8 inches, 10 inches. Then we didn't spray some of them at all. And then other plots were a control where we didn't have any wheat and we just grew the beets. Come harvest time, ran our research harvester through there. We harvested the center 2 rows, took the plot weights, and then we collected some subsamples, which we got our sugar beet quality on. So the trial worked great. It was a pretty interesting year. Some general results from an agronomy point of view is we didn't see any negative effects with the sugar beets in terms of planting or germination or emergence or anything like that. They just grew completely fine in amongst the wheat, got up and going. It did mess up our weed control a little bit. We would normally get in and spray some glyphosate at about 28 days, but for some of these treatments, we still had wheat that we were waiting for it to get tall enough. So that had a little bit of weed pressure in there, but we planted pretty clean, as you saw in the video there, and weeds weren't really an issue at the end of the day. The other thing I'll say is that when you spray out wheat at 4 inches and 6 inches tall, don't expect to see anything left on the surface. It just dried up and it blew away. And then, mid-season you go back and have a look and it just looks like bare ground. It wasn't until you really had 8 inches or 10 inches of height of wheat that it left a mat on the ground post-spray. And in the bottom corner picture there, you can see that in one of those treatments. And that worked really quite well for moisture control, just stopping some of that transpiration, that evaporation throughout the season, and also helped a bit with weed control as well. So the results really, if you look at all of the different treatments, the control is no wheat, and then different spray out times, and then a no spray out time. We can see from the yields here of our sugar beets that there's really no difference in spraying out at 4 inches, 6 inches, and 8 inches. They're all the same as just having no wheat there at all, until you get to 10 inches. If you spray it out, you wait a little bit longer and you spray out at 10 inches, you actually lose 2.6 tons of sugar beet yield, which is super interesting considering, I mean, it's only 2 inches. It doesn't seem like that much, but we go from an 8-inch tall nurse crop to a 10-inch tall, and suddenly we see a yield loss. And also at kind of around about this time, the wheat is just stooling out as well, so that there's much more biomass there. And then if you don't spray it at all and you just, I don't know, for some crazy reason, you let that wheat grow, you will suffer about a 12-ton yield loss in your sugar beets. So no amount of wheat that you harvest from that is going to make up for your 12-ton loss, I'm sure. Sugar percentages and sugar yields and things like that were really no different as well. So the kind of take-home message from this study is, if you're going to plant a spring nurse crop to help out your young sugar beets, then make sure you spray it out at about 8 inches. That way you'll get a little bit of, or you won't get any yield loss, you won't affect your beets, and you'll get a bit of moisture control from that soil covering that residue supplies. So that's all very good. We'll repeat the experiment this year, get another round of data, and then later in the year, we'll actually begin a new experiment and put some fall planted nurse crops in as well. So that should be interesting. Thanks very much. If anyone's got any questions, be happy to take them.
Yeah, Davey, this is Sean. I'm curious what kind of adoption of this practice you're seeing out there, and what kind of trend with adoption you might see.
Good question, Sean. It's not huge. There are some growers that are on much lighter soils, and they pretty much have to do something like this. And a lot of those guys have been experimenting and find these kind of nurse crops to work quite well for them. Having said that, there are a lot of their neighbors who still don't practice anything, and you just watch that soil blowing away in the fall and in the spring, and this is really something that they could do. And something that we're trying to promote as well. So we're just trying to get some experience in how to do this and what to grow and when to spray it and those kind of things. But there should be more adoption of this, absolutely.
You know, thinking about that 8, let it. It's really cool that you kind of hit a sweet spot there. You let it get to 8 inches before you spray, and at that point, it's forming a bit of a mulch cover. And I wonder, in terms of moisture stability for the beets, if that cover is keeping the peak temperatures of that soil down just a little bit, and there is just better moisture management. You would think that would be a key benefit, but
yeah, I agree, Sean, and it's kind of interesting walking through there because I sort of thought, well, the taller the wheat is, the less water we'll see in plots. Just kind of thinking, well, that wheat's going to take it all up. But I mean, we've got a wheel line there, there's adequate irrigation, and really the kind of the opposite was true. Where we had more wheat residue, they definitely stayed moister longer. And it would be an interesting experiment to actually have some moisture probes and be collecting some of that data off them and ask the question, well, does that mean we can stretch our irrigation out a little bit? My hunch is you probably can. But we don't have any data on that.
Yeah, that seems like a really big deal in my mind, and I've been impressed by measuring surface temperature of soil where it's exposed to full sunlight versus under canopy, and the difference can be easily 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is huge in terms of evaporation potential. So yeah, I'm all for it. Love what you're doing here.
Yep, and we're planning to have a field day. Maybe it's something we can talk to Courtney about at a later time, but we'll have this going this year. We've got a whole lot of other cover crops and interesting things happening at that farm as well. So maybe you can come out and have a look later on in the season.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, this Barry, if I've got a question, please.
Sure.
Dave, would cereal rye be a consideration in this instead of wheat with the extensive root mass? And it can grow longer into the fall with lower temperatures. Is that an option? I'm not sure how it would compare in cost, but
yeah, I think rye
it's
is
a very
an
good
option.
soil issue.
Yeah, I think rye is a good option, particularly because of that root biomass. And so
You bet.
really good fibrous root system in rye and something that will hold the soil together. So that's an option, maybe a fall planted rye. I mean, a lot of the guys in sugar beets just plant wheat, and I'd like to kind of explore, well, even is that the best thing to use? Who knows? I mean, maybe you could plant some broadleaf or something and it would be better. But at the moment, it's just wheat that guys are using.
Yeah, I've planted it after the irrigation water went out and just let fall rains bring it, and it gets it started, and it will come in the spring, but still probably give you enough time to terminate it.
Yeah.
Apparently it kills well, Albert says it kills well, so.
Yeah.
Just
this year
Yeah,
it's a good thought. This year we have an experiment where we're interseeding some cover crops into sugar beets in June. And the idea there is to have them just take over post-harvest of the sugar beets, or see whether there's actually anything left of them post-harvest of sugar beets. So that might be an option as well if that works out.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions for Davey? Perfect. Okay, well, thank you, Davey, so much for presenting with us.
Okay, thanks everyone.
And yeah, definitely let me know about the field days, and if I can help spread the word or share of any information, I would definitely do that.
Yep, sounds good.
All right, does anybody have any thoughts, questions? Yeah, thank you so much to all of the presenters who are willing to present with us today. And yeah, if anybody has any questions or comments, or yeah, we can close this meeting out here soon, I think. And I'll remind everybody about, yeah, getting a hold of us about field days, and we should be sending out information about that within the next month or two. Definitely get a hold of me if you want to have people out at your place for an impromptu field day.
I've got to shamelessly plug something that we're planning for trying to put together for Southeast Idaho, which is a field day in Southeast Idaho. Sites under consideration include, or basically between like Fort Hall and Aberdeen, and there's a spud grower that's interseeding with legumes this year, and there's some exciting stuff going on. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And then I don't have the link for all the videos handy. I don't know if you do, Courtney, but just to suffice it to say that these 5-for-5s are always recorded, and there's a list of them on YouTube, and after they're posted, we go back through and we split them out by presenter, so that you can look and see what starts when, and if there's a particular thing of interest, you can just go straight to it. So we should have that up relatively soon, and we'll send out a follow-up email to let you know.
Yes, sounds good. Thanks for those, Sean. Yeah, and I think that's all we have for you all today. So thank you so much for coming, and we'll let you know when the next round of events are starting.
Yeah, and thanks again to all the presenters. Really good stuff today. It was awesome. Thank you, guys.